Hey everyone, Jake here from CVP, and today I have a camera that I think you may be interested in. It features a Super 35 4K global shutter sensor capable of capturing 4K 16-bit RAW, can record slow motion up to 240 frames per second in 2K and 120 frames per second in 4K, and has been used for feature, broadcast and Netflix productions. Well, this camera actually came out nearly 10 years ago now, and it's Sony's now legendary PMW-F55. Now in 2022, you can pick this camera up for a fraction of its price back when it was released, at just over £4,000 for this used kit here. But how does it hold up, and should you actually look at picking up one of these cameras today? Let's delve into it. When Sony announced the F55, they also announced the F5, which was the slightly more affordable model with a different sensor and not quite as complete feature set. You can easily tell these apart by the colour of the FZ mount. It's silver on the F55 and black on the F5. Anyway, in this video today we'll be focusing more on the F55. The red Komodo has really helped popularise global shutter sensors, and the F55 actually used a global shutter on its sensor, which is partly why the F55 became such a staple for documentary filmmaking over the past 10 years. Unlike the F5, you'll have an image that is free from rolling shutter artifacts, such as split strobing and pan jello. The Super 35 global shutter sensor inside of the F55 has an effective diagonal of 26.858mm when in its DCI 4K mode, a pixel pitch of 5.8 microns, and a stated 14 stops of dynamic range. It actually shares the same Bayer pattern and colour filter as the sensor featured in the F65, whereas the F5 shares its design with the F3. The F55 had a rated ISO of 1250, which for the time was quite decent. However, the F5 was rated at 2000. These were actually really high considering most of the market sat at around 800 at this time. When exposing the F55, it was commonly thought to lower your EI down if you didn't have any highlights and wanted to get a cleaner image. This is essentially exposing to the right, which has become a pretty common technique for camera operators nowadays. When it comes to latitude, we thought we would take a look at how the F55 compares to the incredibly sought after FX6. The F55 was rated at 1250 EI and the FX6 was shot at 800 in its low base mode. We used a Sigma 50mm t1.5 lens and dealt with the difference in exposure between the two cameras using shutter speed. We shot F55 RAW on the F55 and then XAVC-I UHD on the FX6 and moved the cameras to adjust the subject and chart size in the frame. I know shooting RAW and a compressed format is giving the F55 an advantage, but considering the F55 with an R5 and media is nearly £1,000 cheaper than an FX6, and you need to add on a Shogun 7 or Ninja 5 Plus to get ProRes RAW out of the FX6, this seriously increases the price, so I think it's a fine comparison if we're talking about price points. Looking at overexposure on the F55 first, performance is good until 4 stops over, where we can start to see the image degrading, but the chart still looks pretty good here. At 4 1/3, the chart starts to shift, but the general colour looks pretty good, all the way to 6 stops over. When compared to the FX6, I would say the F55 just edges it out at the 4 stop mark. However, this isn't surprising given the RAW versus XAVC advantage the F55 has. When it comes to underexposure, the F55 holds up well down to 3 stops under, where it starts to get quite noisy. Though as we are shooting RAW, there is no noise reduction, so things can be cleaned up with some in post. Past 3 stops, it gets very noisy, but colour and detail are held well. The FX6 has much less chroma noise and holds colour just as well across the range. While the F55 is now finally 10 years old, the image quality is still great, and there's no reason why they still can't be used on a range of different productions today. Thanks to it being a native 4K sensor, having great image quality and the ability to record in some very respectable formats, the F55 is actually Netflix approved, and there have been several productions over the years shot with it, with some of them even being as recent as 2019. With it being an excellent B camera to the F65, there are also a bunch of features that were shot on the F65 that use the F55 alongside it, such as Tomorrowland and the fantastically done Ex Machina. I also really liked their use on season 1 of Last Chance U, and since the first season in 2016, they have now switched over to Sony Venice's and FX9's. The F5 and F55 have slightly different internal recording options, but both use S/S as their media type. The F55 can record a bunch of different formats internally, with XAVC 4K Class 480 being the most robust internally. Here's a chart of everything that's possible across the two different cameras. The highlights of the F55 is the ability to record 2K 180p XAVC and UHD and DCI 4K up to 60p internally. You'll just need to make sure that you grab the correct SYS cards for the format you want to record. You can also record a bunch of other broadcast legacy formats, as well as SR-SST. This is based off of Sony's HDCam SR tapes, which were some of the highest quality tape available back in the day. There are 3 variants of this, with one that is actually uncompressed, fully sampling all RGB channels. This is only available in Full HD, but it does downsample the 4K frame, which is also possible with other Full HD or 2K formats. The 4K Class 480 footage looks good straight out of camera, and thanks to the ability to record the same S-Log3, S-Gamma3.Cine color space and gamma combination that is present in all of Sony's current cinema line of cameras, as well as S-Log2, it processes through post-production very nicely. While the internal recording options are great with the F55, you also had the chance to record RAW using one of 2 external recording units, the AXS-R5 and AXS-R7. The R5 was Sony's first external recorder unit for the F55. It came out with the camera and allowed for the capture of 4K 16-bit RAW files up to 60 frames per second, and 2K up to 240 frames per second with the F55, and up to 120 frames per second with the F5. This unit connects to the back of the camera really easily and doesn't feel like an afterthought bolted on. It really does feel like it's part of the camera package and is easy to use. It uses these larger AXS-M cards to record to, and also enables simultaneous recording to the SYS cards in the F55's body while recording RAW externally. The RAW recorded is compressed at a ratio of roughly 3:1, so files aren't as massive as they could be, but shooting at 23.98 frames per second will result in a data rate of roughly 944 megabits per second. When compared to XAVC 4K Class 480's 384 megabits per second, you will go through cards much quicker. Grabbing an R5 now and some media won't actually break the bank. You can get an R5 for around £600 and a 512GB AXS-M card for around £300. So bundle that with the F55 we have here, and you have a £5,000 camera package that can shoot 4K up to 60p 16-bit RAW, which is actually really impressive. However, if you want to get even more out of the F55, you can with Sony's newer R7 recorder. The R7 is much newer than the R5, and is actually still currently used on the first generation of the Venice. It attaches the same way as the R5, but gives the F55 the ability to record 4K 16-bit linear RAW files up to 120 frames per second, and 2K up to 240 frames per second, which is even impressive in today's market. With this, Sony updated the unit to be more rugged and bigger than the previous recorder, as well as giving it an extra media slot over the single slot of the R5. It also uses a slimmed down version of the AXS card, which are still used in the Sony Venice 2 today, and could be incredibly pricey if you want to record 4K 120, as it requires the 4.8 gigabits per second variants of these cards. These cards really aren't cheap, which is a shame, but they are still a current media type, so it isn't too surprising. The R7 also gives the F55 the ability to record XOCN, which is Sony's own compressed RAW format at up to 60p in 4K. And with the R7 you can record ST and LT, ST being roughly 3:1 as well, and LT being 4:1, which isn't as high as some of the options from Red, and I'm sure plenty of operators would have wanted a more compressed option at the time. The R7 also adds a 30-second cache, which was great for wildlife and documentary filmmakers needing that buffer to make sure they captured the action. This recorder and media can add up really quickly to be more expensive than the camera, but it does really add some amazing features to the camera. Thanks to the age of all of the formats that the F55 can capture, they pretty much are all supported well in most post-production tools. XOCN and F55 RAW are natively recognised in Resolve, with plenty of RAW parameters to adjust when processing your rushes. Playback performance on our Mac Studio workstations is also good, even with some colour processing applied. The specs and an image a camera produces is only half of what makes up a camera. The overall design and usability is just as important for working professionals. The F55 system was Sony's first modular Cine camera, unlike their previous cameras, and especially their flagship camera at the time, the F65. The form factor of the body was decently compact but long, and this means that you can start building it out with one of the external recorders, a battery, a viewfinder, a top handle and a base plate, and you have a camera that sits great on the shoulder. This made the camera really popular for people coming from broadcast cameras and made the F55 a hit amongst documentary camera operators due to how close it was to a regular shoulder mount camera, but with all of the benefits of its Super 35 sensor. This camera, along with the mirror, helped transform the look of documentary TV over the past decade, and some awesome run and gun work has been shot on this camera. A good EVF is a must for any working camera operator, and the F55 had 3 options: the DVF L350, the DVF EL100, and the DVF EL200. The EL200 was released in 2017 and is still the same gorgeous viewfinder being used on the Venice. Picking up one of these OLED viewfinders now will give you a great operating experience, but they are expensive compared to the used prices of F55 kits now. The EL100 is very similar and is actually the one we have with us on this configuration here. It's still an OLED display and looks great, but is roughly half as bright as the EL200. The most affordable out of the bunch was the DVF L350. It features a 540p 3.5-inch TFT LCD, and the ability to flip up the monocular and use it as a small regular monitor was pretty handy as well. The lens mount was also ahead of its time. It featured an interchangeable PL mount which would mount into the camera's native FZ mount. FZ mount is a massive mount with a short flange that allows you to adapt B4 as well as EF lenses with the correct adapter, but the PL adapter was obviously the most popular as it came with the camera. With it being Super 35, there are plenty of awesome zoom lenses that can be used at great prices now, especially when compared to their full frame equivalents. Lenses like the Angenieux Optimo zooms, Fujinon 19-90 Cabrio and Canon CN7 were often paired with the F55 for run and gun camera operators, and these lenses still hold up fantastically today. When we looked at the Alexa Classic the other month, we mentioned the power draw of the camera being one of the biggest issues with it. Well, the F55 will draw a maximum of roughly 40 watts, which is under half of that of the Alexa. This means that batteries will last almost double the time that they would with the Alexa with the F55. And this does make the F55 a much more usable camera for run and gun situations. It comes with a V-mount out of the box, but you can get gold mount plates for it. It's a 12-volt camera, so you can get plenty of power solutions for it. It also features a 4-pin XLR power input, which is a really nice, solid standard connector for using off-camera power solutions like a block battery. Physically, the camera draws influence from all of Sony's cameras, as well as some other cameras on the market at the time, and this design philosophy has carried through to their Venice series. You have an operator side designed for quick operation with a good range of buttons, a switch for disabling the changing of settings, which was good for documentary use, and fast adjustment of the internal 3-step ND, which compared to modern solutions does look a bit dated by just offering a clear 0.9 and 1.8 IR NDs. The dial also doesn't feel the most reassuring to use, especially compared to the Venice. The camera we have with us here is running firmware 9.2, which was Sony's last firmware for the F55. And if you take a look at the menu system structure, it will instantly remind you of the FX9 and Venice, as they are at the core still very similar menu systems. Boot time is also pretty good for a camera of its age and class at roughly 13 seconds. But one thing you will run into when operating it is lots and lots of restarting of the camera whenever you change through different recording modes and formats. On the right hand side of the camera, you have plenty of I/O to please even the most demanding productions. There are 2 full-size phantom powered XLR inputs which can be removed, a 4-pin XLR power input, 4 SDIs that can output 4K via quad link, a full-size HDMI which can also output 4K, a BNC timecode in and out, and Genlock, and a bunch more. These cameras were designed to be workhorses, and you can feel that as soon as you pick one up. There's a level of sturdiness that the FX cameras don't quite have compared to the F55. Throughout the camera's 10 years on the market, they have pretty much been in every condition you can imagine, and there are plenty of them still left working today, thanks in part to their serviceability. Sony really refined and pushed the F55 to get the most out of it throughout the years, with new firmware periodically, and while sadly the F5 and F55 are now discontinued, I can still see them being used for years to come. Yes, the Venice that Sony say is its replacement is a better camera in many ways, but there are plenty of camera operators that long for the day that Sony brings out a true successor to the F55. Something that sits between the FX9 and the Venice in the same form factor as the F55, with a modern sensor and design principles. I would be damn excited to see that camera system, and I really hope Sony will do this one day. In the meantime, the F55 is still a fantastic camera with plenty of life left in it, and considering how hard new cameras are to get at the moment, and the prices these have fallen to now, I think they can offer an excellent value for someone looking at this form factor of camera. Buying these cameras used can be a bit of a minefield though, as some of them will be heavily used and abused, which is why buying through us can be a much better experience than buying privately. We are a Sony approved service centre, so every Sony camera that comes through our doors used will be professionally evaluated and serviced by one of our experienced staff. Pretty much all of our used kit also comes with a 90-day warranty, which offers you that little bit extra peace of mind. We have a constant stream of unique and interesting kit flowing through our used and ex-demo section, so if you want to see what we currently have in stock, head over to cvp.com/used. We also buy used equipment, so if you want to upgrade or just clear out your old kit fast and easily, get in contact with us via the email below. Let us know what you think of the Sony F55 and if you've purchased any used kit before and your experience in the comments below. And if you like the video, please give it a like and maybe even consider subscribing so you don't miss out on our awesome upcoming content. And thank you so much for watching.